The great chamber of the Galactic Concorde stretched upward into darkness, its walls made of living crystal that pulsed with soft blue light. 300 species had gathered here, their representatives filling seats carved from stone and metal and substances that had no name in any human language. The air itself hummed with translation devices working overtime, converting thousands of alien tongues into something each delegate could understand. Ambassador. Daniel Perry stood alone on the central platform, a single human being surrounded by creatures that had conquered stars, while his ancestors were still learning to make fire. He wore a simple gray suit, nothing fancy, nothing threatening. His hands were folded in front of him, and his face showed no emotion at all. He had practiced that face for months. The Vorthani High Counselor rose from his throne at the far end of the chamber. He was 12 feet tall, covered in black armor that was actually part of his body, and his 4 eyes glowed with ancient hatred. The Vorthani had ruled this region of space for 8,000 years before joining the Concorde. They did not like newcomers. They especially did not like newcomers who refused to bow. The Council has reached its decision regarding species 7291, the Vorthani announced, his voice booming through the chamber like thunder. The species known as humanity. Daniel did not move. He barely breathed. After careful consideration of all evidence, the Galactic Concorde has determined that humanity is not qualified for full membership. Your species is too young, too aggressive, and too unstable to be trusted with the rights and privileges of civilized beings. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber. Daniel heard clicking sounds from the insectoid thresh delegation, wet gurgling from the aquatic morans, and sharp barks from the wolf-like canary. None of them were friendly sounds, the Vorthani continued, clearly enjoying himself. Therefore, under Article 7 of the Founding Charter, humanity is hereby classified as a servitor race. Your home planet and all colonial territories will be absorbed into the Concorde. Your population will be redistributed according to labor needs. Those who resist will be eliminated. Those who comply will serve. He paused, letting the words sink in. You have no voice in this matter. You have no appeal. This is simply the way of things. The strong rule. The weak serve. Your species should be grateful that we offer you survival at all. The chamber erupted in approval. Thousands of aliens stamped their feet, slapped their tentacles, and made whatever noise their biology allowed. They were celebrating. To them, this was justice. This was the natural order working exactly as it should. Daniel waited for the noise to die down. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm and clear. May I ask a question? The Vorthani looked surprised. Servitor species did not usually ask questions. You may speak. I want to make sure I understand the terms correctly. You are saying that humanity has no rights under your laws, that we are property now, that you can do whatever you want with us, and there is nothing we can legally do to stop you. That is correct. The Vorthani sounded almost bored. And if we resist, you will destroy us entirely. Every last one of you. We have sterilized planets before. It is not difficult. Daniel nodded slowly. He reached down to his wrist and tapped a small device that looked like an ordinary watch. Thank you for the clarification. I just wanted to make sure we understood each other perfectly. Deep beneath the Rocky Mountains of Earth, Admiral Catherine Cole stood in a command center filled with screens and nervous officers. She was 53 years old, with short gray hair and eyes that had seen too many battles. When she received Daniel's signal, she did not hesitate.
Oh.
This is Admiral Cole. Begin Operation Looking Glass. I repeat. Begin Looking Glass. This is not a drill. Around her, officers scrambled to their positions. Encrypted messages flashed across the stars at faster-than-light speeds. On 100 worlds, in 1,000 hidden locations, humans received the order they had been preparing for since first contact 40 years ago. The Concorde thought they knew everything about humanity. They had studied human history, human biology, human psychology. They had watched humans fight each other over land and resources and ideas. They had concluded that humans were dangerous but primitive, clever but undisciplined, ambitious but easily controlled. They had made a terrible mistake. For 40 years, while smiling at diplomatic functions and signing trade agreements and pretending to be impressed by alien technology, humanity had been preparing, not for war exactly. Humans knew they could not win a direct fight against the Concorde's military. The combined fleet had 12,000 warships. Humanity had less than 200. But humans had learned something important during their short, bloody history on Earth. They had learned that power was not just about weapons. Power was about information. Power was about connections. Power was about knowing things that other people did not know. And humans had spent 40 years learning everything they could. About the Concorde, they had studied the communication networks that linked 300 species across 9 spiral arms. They had mapped the supply chains that kept billions of beings fed and comfortable. They had analyzed the automated systems that ran factories and farms and power plants on 10,000 worlds. They had found the weaknesses that no one else remembered existed, because no one else had looked in 12,000 years. The Concorde had built a magnificent machine, but they had forgotten how it worked. They had forgotten that machines need maintenance. They had forgotten that every system has vulnerabilities. Humanity had not forgotten. Humanity had taken notes. In the council chamber, Daniel Perry watched the celebrations continue. The delegates were already discussing how to divide up human territory, which species would get which workers, how quickly the conquest could be completed. None of them noticed that Daniel was smiling. "They have no idea," he said quietly, too soft for the translators to pick up. "They have absolutely no idea what they just started." On Earth, Catherine Cole stood at the center of her command room and watched the first status reports come in. Hidden bases were activating across human space. Ships that officially did not exist were powering up their engines. Specialists who had spent their entire careers preparing for this moment were finally putting their training to use. The Concorde had voted to enslave humanity. They had followed their laws, their procedures, their ancient traditions. Everything had been proper and correct and absolutely legal. But humanity did not recognize those laws. Humanity had never agreed to play by those rules. And now, humanity was going to show the galaxy what happened when you tried to put chains on a species that had clawed its way up from nothing, that had survived ice ages and plagues and world wars, that had looked up at the stars and refused to believe that the universe was not theirs to claim. The game was about to change, and the Concorde would never see it coming. Fleet Commander Zoreth had conquered 11 species during his long career. He had burned cities, cracked moons, and watched entire civilizations surrender at the sight of his warships. He was old even by Kalani standards, and his scales had faded from bright green to a dull gray that spoke of centuries of service. Nothing surprised him anymore until the humans disappeared. The combined fleet arrived in Earth's solar system 3 weeks after the Council's verdict. 12,000 warships from 40 different species, carrying enough firepower to crack a planet in half. They expected resistance. They expected defiance. They expected humans to fight and die in a blaze of desperate, foolish courage. What they found was nothing. Earth hung in space like a blue and white jewel, beautiful and silent. The cities were still there. The roads and bridges and power plants were still functioning, but the people were gone. 8 billion human beings had simply vanished. "This is not possible," Zoreth's tactical officer said, staring at his sensors. "They cannot have evacuated the entire planet. We would have detected the ships. We would have seen the energy signatures. They are hiding somewhere, and find them," Zoroth growled. Search parties landed on every continent. Soldiers swept through empty streets and abandoned buildings. They found food still sitting on tables, vehicles parked in driveways, computers still running. It was as if every human on Earth simply stepped out for a moment and never returned. The same story repeated itself on every human colony. Mars was empty. The stations around Jupiter were empty. The mining outposts in the asteroid belt were empty. 47 worlds and 300 orbital installations, all abandoned. 9 billion humans had disappeared without leaving a single trace. Zoreth stood on the bridge of his flagship and felt something he had not experienced in centuries. Fear, Where did they go? He demanded. Someone tell me where they went. No one could answer. What Zorath did not know, what the entire Concord failed to understand, was that humans had not actually disappeared at all. They had simply moved to places that the Concord did not know how to look. They had hidden in the cracks of the universe, in the spaces between stars, in ships so small and so quiet that even the most advanced sensors could not detect them. Lieutenant Commander Samuel Ortiz floated in a control room, barely larger than a closet, aboard a ship that was little more than a metal box with an engine attached. Around him in similar boxes scattered across 100 light years, 3,000 other specialists waited for their orders. They were the tip of the spear, the first wave of a plan that had taken 40 years to prepare. Samuel had joined the program straight out of college, recruited by people who told him that the most important war in human history would be fought with keyboards instead of guns. He had spent 20 years learning everything there was to know about the Concord's technology. He understood their communication protocols better than the species that had invented them. He knew their security systems, their automated networks, their power grids, and now he was going to use that knowledge to bring an empire to its knees. Package 1 is ready, he reported through a quantum-encrypted channel, awaiting authorization. Admiral Cole's voice came back clear despite the impossible distance. You are authorized. Begin distribution. Samuel took a deep breath and started typing. The virus was not a crude thing. It did not delete files or crash systems or do anything obvious. It was subtle, patient, almost gentle. It slipped into the Concord's networks through 1,000 different entry points. Hiding in routine maintenance updates and standard communication packets, it spread slowly, copying itself from system to system, node to node, always staying below the threshold that would trigger an alert, and once it was in place, it began to make small changes. A supply ship received new coordinates that were slightly wrong. A communication relay developed a minor glitch that caused messages to arrive late. A fabrication system started producing components that were just barely out of specification. None of these problems were serious by themselves. None of them would raise any alarms, but there were millions of them, and they were spreading. Back in Earth's solar system, Zorath was growing frustrated. His soldiers had searched every building on Earth and found nothing. His engineers had examined every human computer and discovered only useless personal files and entertainment programs. The humans had cleaned up after themselves very thoroughly. They must have left some clue, he insisted. Some indication of where they went. No species can move 9 billion individuals without leaving evidence. His communications officer interrupted. Commander, I am having difficulty reaching the home fleet. There appears to be interference in the relay network. Zorath waved a claw dismissively. Fix it, Commander. I am trying, but the problem seems to be spreading. Other ships are reporting similar difficulties. For a moment, Zorath felt that fear again, but he pushed it aside. Communication glitches happened all the time. They had nothing to do with the missing humans. He was wrong. Catherine. Cole watched the status reports flowing into her hidden command center, tucked away in an asteroid that officially did not exist. Green lights were appearing across her map as each part of the plan fell into place. The virus was spreading faster than expected. The Concord's automated systems were accepting the corrupted updates without question, because they had been designed to trust each other, and no one had ever imagined that someone might exploit that trust. They built their empire on convenience, Catherine said to the officers around her. They automated everything. They let machines make decisions because machines were faster and more efficient than biological beings. And now they have forgotten how any of it actually works. Will they figure it out? Her aide asked. Catherine shook her head. Not in time. The virus is designed to cause problems that look like natural failures. Equipment wearing out. Software bugs. Normal entropy. By the time they realize that someone is doing this deliberately, it will be too late to stop. She looked at the map, at the thousands of green lights representing human agents and hidden systems spread across Concord space. Each one was a tiny piece of a puzzle that the Concord could not even see, let alone solve. They thought they were conquering us, she said. They thought we were primitive savages who would either submit or die. They never considered a third option. What option is that? Catherine smiled. It was not a kind smile. We do not submit. We do not die. We change the game entirely. We make them play by our rules, using their own pieces against them. And by the time they understand what is happening, they will have no choice but to give us what we want. Somewhere in the darkness between stars, Samuel Ortiz finished uploading the last package and leaned back in his chair. The virus was complete. The trap was set. Now all they had to do was wait for the Concorde to fall into it. It would not take long. The first food riots began on the agricultural world of Thesan 4, where automated harvesting machines had stopped recognizing when crops were ready to pick. The machines rolled through fields of golden grain and declared them unripe. They checked their sensors, found nothing wrong, and continued to wait for crops that were already rotting on the ground. 3 billion beings lived on Thesan 4. Within a month, they began to starve. The Thesan government sent urgent messages to the Concorde capital, begging for emergency supplies. But the messages took days to arrive instead of seconds. The communication relays kept glitching, rerouting transmissions to wrong destinations, playing them back on loops, or simply losing them entirely. By the time help was finally organized, the situation had become a crisis, and Thesan 4 was not alone. Across Concorde space, small problems were becoming big disasters. On the forge moons of the Kalani Empire, fabrication systems produced engine parts with microscopic cracks that would not show up until the engines were already running at full power. 17 warships suffered catastrophic failures before anyone realized that the parts themselves were defective. On the pleasure worlds where the wealthy, elite spent their days, security systems began locking down randomly, trapping counselors and ambassadors in their own chambers for hours or days at a time. Climate control systems fluctuated wildly, turning comfortable rooms into freezing vaults or sweltering ovens. The automated servants that handled every aspect of daily life started forgetting orders, repeating tasks endlessly, or simply standing still until someone manually reset them. The Vorthani High Counselor, whose species had not performed manual labor in 6,000 years, found himself unable to open his own door. "This is sabotage," he declared when he finally escaped, his voice shaking with rage. "The humans are doing this. They must be." But no one could prove it. Every system that failed had a perfectly reasonable explanation. Equipment wore out. Software developed bugs. Networks experienced congestion. These things happen all the time in a civilization that spanned 9 spiral arms. They had just never happened all at once before. Fleet Commander Zoroth, still searching for the missing humans in Earth's solar system, received orders to return to Concorde space and help maintain order. But when he tried to jump his fleet back to the capital, half of his ships emerged at the wrong coordinates. Their navigation computers insisted they had arrived exactly where they were supposed to be, even as their sensors showed empty space instead of populated systems. "There is something wrong with our systems," his engineering chief reported. "I cannot identify the source. Every diagnostic shows normal operation, but the results are clearly incorrect." "Then run the diagnostics again," Zoroth ordered. "I have. 27 times. The computers say everything is fine, but everything is obviously not fine." Zoroth stared at the main screen, which showed a star field that should have been the capital system. He was beginning to understand something terrible. The humans had not disappeared. They had never left. They had simply changed the battlefield to one that his species could not see. This was not a war of ships and soldiers. This was a war of information. And the Concorde was losing in her hidden command center. Admiral Catherine Cole watched the chaos spread with grim satisfaction. The virus was working better than anyone had hoped. Each small failure caused larger problems, which caused even larger problems, which spread to other systems in an expanding wave of dysfunction. "The Kalani and the Vorthani are blaming each other for the fabrication defects," her intelligence officer reported. "Their alliance is fracturing. 3 border worlds have already declared neutrality rather than pick a side." "Good," Catherine said. "What about the smaller species?" "The Thesan are furious about the food shortages. They are threatening to withdraw from the Concorde entirely if they do not receive immediate aid. The Morans are claiming that someone is deliberately targeting their water purification systems. The Canary have mobilized their military because they think they are under attack. Catherine nodded. This was exactly what they had planned. The Concord was not a single government. It was an alliance of 300 species who had agreed to work together because it was more convenient than fighting. That convenience was now disappearing, and the old hatreds were bubbling back to the surface for 12,000 years. The Concord had maintained peace through technology. Their systems kept everyone fed, comfortable, and connected. Without those systems, there was nothing holding the alliance together except fear and tradition. And fear and tradition were not enough when people were starving and blaming their neighbors. How long can we maintain this? Catherine asked. As long as we need to, Samuel Ortiz replied from his hidden station. The virus is self-sustaining now. Even if they found and removed every copy, the damage is already done. They have forgotten how to run their own civilization manually. It would take them years to rebuild the knowledge they lost. Catherine thought about that. 12,000 years of progress. And the Concord had become so dependent on their machines that they could not survive without them. It was almost sad in a way. They had built wonders that humanity could barely imagine. They had conquered disease and hunger and war. And they had forgotten that all of it required maintenance. They will come to us eventually, she said. When things get bad enough, they will have no choice. We give them a way out. We offer to fix everything, to restore their systems, to make their lives comfortable again. All they have to do is treat us as equals instead of slaves. Do you think they will accept? Catherine looked at the map, at the spreading patches of red that represented systems in crisis, at the frantic communications between species that were rapidly losing trust in each other. The Concord had built their empire on the assumption that strength was the only thing that mattered. They were about to learn that weakness came in many forms, and that the most dangerous enemy was not the one with the biggest guns, but the one who understood how everything worked. They will accept, she said, because the alternative is watching everything they built collapse around them. Pride is expensive. Survival is not. She turned to her communications officer. Prepare a message for Ambassador Perry. Tell him it is almost time to reintroduce ourselves. The Concord is ready to negotiate, even if they do not know it yet. The officer nodded and began typing. Across the galaxy, the carefully constructed order of 12,000 years continued to crumble. And in the spaces between stars, hidden in the cracks of a civilization that had forgotten how to look, humanity waited patiently for their moment to emerge. It would not be much longer now, 6 months after the invasion began. The great chamber of the Galactic Concord was no longer a place of confidence and power. The living crystal walls still pulsed with soft blue light, but the atmosphere had changed completely. Fear hung in the air like smoke. Anger crackled between delegations that had been allies for millennia. The Vorthani. High Counselor looked like he had aged a century in 6 months. His black armor had lost its shine, and his 4 eyes were dim with exhaustion. The food shortages had hit even his species now. The communication failures had isolated systems that had never been isolated before. The carefully maintained order of 12,000 years was falling apart, and no one could stop it. We must find the humans, he said for the 100th time. They are responsible for this. They must be how? The Kalani representative demanded. We have searched every world they ever touched. We have scanned every ship, every station, every asteroid. They are simply gone. It is as if they never existed at all. Then they are using technology we do not understand. Technology they hid from us. And if they are, what do you propose we do about it? We cannot fight an enemy we cannot find. We cannot negotiate with an enemy who will not appear. We are helpless, and every day makes things worse. The chamber erupted into argument, as it had so many times in recent months. Species blamed each other for the crisis. Old grudges surfaced. Alliances that had stood for thousands of years were crumbling under the pressure of fear and hunger and confusion. And then, without warning, the main screen at the front of the chamber flickered to life. Ambassador Daniel Perry appeared on the display. His image slightly distorted, but his voice perfectly clear. He was standing in what looked like a small, simple room with gray walls and minimal furniture. He was alone, and he was smiling. "Good morning," he said. "I believe we have some things to discuss." The chamber went silent. Every eye, every sensor, every attention-focusing organ in the room turned toward the screen. For 6 months, the humans had been ghosts. Now, suddenly, one of them was speaking. The Vorsani was the first to recover. "You dare to show yourself after what you have done. You have attacked our civilization. You have killed millions through starvation and system failures. You are criminals of the highest order." "We have killed no one," Daniel replied calmly. "Your systems failed on their own. We simply helped them fail a little faster. And we can help them work again, if you are willing to listen." "You expect us to negotiate with terrorists?" "I expect you to negotiate with equals. That is all we have ever wanted. You voted to enslave us. You declared that we had no rights, no voice, no value, except as labor. You told us that our only options were submission or death." Daniel's smile faded. "We found a third option." The Kalani representative leaned forward. "What do you want?" "Simple things. Full membership in the Concord. Equal voting rights. Recognition of human sovereignty over our existing territories. The same status that any other civilized species enjoys. You expect us to reward you for attacking us? I expect you to recognize reality. Your systems are failing, and you do not know how to fix them. We do. Your alliance is fracturing, and you do not know how to hold it together. We can help. Your people are starving, and you do not know how to feed them. We have solutions." Daniel paused, letting his words sink in. "You have 2 choices. Accept our terms and allow us to restore your civilization to working order, or refuse and watch everything you've built collapse around you while you search for humans you will never find. We have hidden caches in places you cannot imagine. We have agents in systems you believe are secure. We can keep this going for years if necessary. Decades. However long it takes for you to understand that we are not going away." The chamber erupted again, but this time the tone was different. There was still anger, but there was also desperation. 6 months of crisis had worn down even the proudest species. Pride was expensive, as Catherine Cole had said. Survival was not. "How do we know you can actually fix our systems?" a Thesan delegate asked. His species had suffered the worst from the food shortages, and he looked half-starved himself. "Because we broke them," Daniel said simply. "We understand your technology better than you do. We have spent 40 years studying it, learning how it works, finding its weaknesses. We can use that knowledge to destroy, or we can use it to build. The choice is yours. And if we refuse, then things continue as they are. More failures, more shortages, more deaths. Eventually, your alliance will collapse entirely, and you will be back to fighting each other over scraps. The way you did before the Concord existed. We will survive regardless. We have been preparing for this for a very long time." The Vorthani High Counselor stared at the screen with pure hatred in his eyes. He had spent his entire life believing in the natural order, in the right of the strong to rule, and the duty of the weak to serve. And now a species that should have been nothing more than slaves was dictating terms to the most powerful civilization in the galaxy. "You cannot expect us to simply accept this," he said through clenched teeth. "You are blackmailing us. You are threatening the destruction of everything we have built." "No," Daniel replied. "We are offering to save everything you have built. We are offering partnership instead of conflict. We are offering a future where humans and Concord species work together, each bringing something valuable to the relationship. You have power and resources and knowledge accumulated over 12,000 years. We have adaptability and creativity and a very different way of looking at problems." He spread his hands. "Together, we could accomplish things that neither of us could achieve alone. Or we can continue this pointless war until everything falls apart. The choice is yours, but I hope you will choose wisely. We would rather be friends than enemies. We would rather build than destroy. But we will not be slaves, not now. Not ever." The screen flickered and went dark. For a long moment, no one in the chamber spoke. Then, slowly, the delegates began to talk among themselves. Calculations were being made. Old assumptions were being questioned. The universe had shifted. Everyone was trying to figure out where they stood in the new order. The vote would take 3 days. But in the end, there was only one possible outcome. The Concord had no choice but to accept, because the alternative was unthinkable. The humans had won, not through strength or violence, but through understanding. They had studied their enemy, found their weakness, and used it to change the rules of the game entirely. And now, everything was about to change. The vote passed on the 3rd day by a margin so narrow that it required a recount. But it passed. Humanity was officially recognized as a full member of the Galactic Concord, with all the rights and privileges that entailed. The enslavement order was revoked. Human territories were restored. And for the first time in 12,000 years, the Ancient Alliance had been forced to change its rules for a species that refused to accept them. Admiral Catherine Cole stood on a hillside in Colorado. Watching the sun rise over the mountains for the first time in 9 months, she had spent the entire crisis underground, in bunkers and hidden command centers and cramped ships drifting through empty space. Now, finally, she could breathe real air again. Ambassador Daniel Perry stood beside her, looking tired but satisfied. His work was only beginning, really. The hard part of any victory was figuring out what to do afterward. But for this one moment, he allowed himself to enjoy the sunrise. "They hate us," he said quietly. "Every species in the Concord hates us now. We humiliated them. We showed them that they were not as powerful as they believed. That kind of thing is not easily forgiven." "Let them hate us," Catherine replied. "They were going to enslave us. They were going to break our families apart and scatter us across the galaxy as workers. They were going to destroy our culture, our history, everything that made us who we are. They do not get to be angry about how we survived." "That is fair." Daniel was quiet for a moment. "But what happens now? We are part of their system. We have to work with them, negotiate with them, build relationships with species that wish we did not exist. How do we do that?" Catherine turned to look at him. There was something in her eyes that was very old, something that remembered every time humanity had faced destruction and refused to accept it. Ice ages, plagues, world wars, near-extinction events that should have wiped them out entirely. Somehow, humans always found a way through. "We do what we have always done," she said. "We adapt. We learn. We find common ground with people who seem completely different from us. We have been doing that since the first tribes met each other on the plains of Africa. This is just a bigger version of the same challenge. And if they refuse to cooperate, if they try to push us out or undermine us, or find ways to punish us for what we did, then we deal with that when it happens. But I do not think it will. The Concord needs us now, whether they admit it or not. We showed them that their systems are vulnerable. We showed them that 12,000 years of automation made them forget how things actually work. They need someone to teach them again, to help them rebuild their knowledge base, to make their civilization more resilient. And we are going to be their teachers." Catherine smiled. "We are going to be their partners. But yes, in some ways, we are going to teach them. They built an empire on convenience and strength. We survived on adaptability and cooperation. Both approaches have value. The question is whether they are willing to learn from us the way we learned from them." In the months that followed, human engineers and diplomats spread throughout Concord space. They fixed the systems that had been broken, but they did more than that. They asked questions that no one had thought to ask in millennia. Why did this machine work this way? What happened if that system failed? How would you solve this problem if the automated solution was not available? At first, the other species resented these questions. They saw them as insults, as suggestions that their technology was somehow inferior. But slowly, some of them began to understand. The humans were not criticizing their achievements. They were helping them protect those achievements from future threats. Lieutenant Commander Samuel Ortiz, who had spent 20 years learning how to break Concord systems, now spent his days teaching others how to maintain them. He traveled to 100 worlds, working with engineers from dozens of species, showing them the hidden weaknesses that he had once exploited. "The machines are wonderful," he told a group of young colony technicians on one of their forge moons. "But you should never become dependent on anything you do not understand. Always know how things work. Always have a backup plan. Always be ready to adapt when circumstances change." The colony listened skeptically at first. They had never needed to think this way before. But some of them began to see the wisdom in it. Redundancy was not a sign of weakness. It was a form of strength that their culture had forgotten. 5 years after the crisis, the Galactic Concord was different in ways that would have seemed impossible a decade earlier. Human ideas about resilience and adaptability had spread throughout the Alliance. Automated systems were still used, but they were no longer blindly trusted. Species that had relied on machines for everything began to rediscover old skills, old knowledge, old ways of solving problems, and humanity. The primitive newcomers who had been sentenced to enslavement had become one of the most influential voices in galactic politics, not through conquest or intimidation, but through proving their value, through showing that they had something unique to offer. Catherine Cole, now retired from military service, spent her final years writing a history of the crisis. She called it simply adaptation, and it became required reading in academies across the Concord. The book did not glorify what humanity had done. It did not pretend that their methods had been entirely ethical. It simply told the truth about what had happened and why. The galaxy had tried to enslave humanity, and humanity had refused, not by being stronger, but by being different. By thinking in ways that other species had forgotten. By understanding that the rules of any game could be changed if you understood them well enough. The Vorsani High Counselor, who had signed the original enslavement order, died without ever forgiving the humans for what they had done to his pride. But his grandchildren grew up in a Concord that was stronger and more resilient than it had been for thousands of years, thanks in part to the changes that humanity had brought. And somewhere in the archives of Earth, in a secure database that only a handful of people knew existed, the original plans for Operation Looking Glass remained stored, a reminder of what humanity was capable of when pushed to the wall, a warning to any future enemy who might think that humans could be conquered. Simply because they were small and new and seemingly weak, the game had been rewritten, and the galaxy would never be the same. Daniel Perry. Now old and gray himself gave one final interview before he retired from public life. A young reporter asked him what he thought humanity's greatest strength was. He smiled, remembering the council chamber where everything had begun, remembering the faces of beings who had thought they controlled the universe. "We learn," he said. "We adapt. We find ways to survive that no one expects. And we never, ever give up. That is what makes us human. And that is why we are still here." Reporter asked if he had any regrets about what they had done. Daniel thought about it for a long moment. "We did what we had to do," he said finally. "I wish it had not been necessary. I wish they had simply treated us as equals from the beginning. But they did not, and so we had to change their minds. Sometimes the only way to earn respect is to prove that you deserve it. We proved it, and now, hopefully, no one will make the same mistake again." He looked out the window at the stars, at the countless worlds that were now open to humanity, at the future that had seemed impossible just a few years before. "We rewrote the game," he said quietly, "and now we get to help write the next chapter. That is all any species can ask for. The chance to matter, the chance to make a difference, the chance to leave the universe a little better than we found it." Outside, the stars continued to shine as they had for billions of years. But now, among those stars, humanity had found its place. Not as servants or slaves, but as equals. As partners, as a species that had faced extinction and chosen, instead, to thrive. The game had changed, and humanity was just getting started.